Hi folks, in this video let's learn about some of the basic building blocks of a Python program, which are expressions, statements and comments. First, what is an expression? An expression is a piece of code that evaluates to a value. It is a combination of variables, literals, function calls and operators. Let's see some examples of expressions to further understand this. Let's see the first example. Here we have an expression 10 plus 20. Now when we write these constant values directly like 10 and 20, these are called literals. As these are integers, we can call them as integer literals. So in this expression we have two literals and we also have an operator plus. Now this expression will evaluate to a value 30. Let's go to the next expression. Now what all things we have in this expression? We have an integer literal 2. We also have two variables a and b. Let's assume that these two variables hold some integer values like 10, 20. Now we also have two operators which are star, which is nothing but multiplication, and then we also have addition operator. So based on values of a and b, this expression will evaluate to some value. Now in the next expression we have two strings hello and world. Whenever we enclose something inside double quotes or single quotes, that is considered as a string literal. Just like how 10 and 20 are called integer literals, similarly we call these hello and world as string literals. And whenever we use this plus operator between two strings, this is considered as concatenation operation, which means these two strings are concatenated to form one common string, which is hello world. Here in this example we have an expression length of string hello. Now here length is an inbuilt function provided by Python to find the length of any sequence. So here we have a string of length 5, right? So this length function will return value 5. So we can say this expression will evaluate to a value 5. Now if we see the last example, this is nothing but a formula to find simple interest, if you remember. So simple interest is equal to principal into time period into rate of interest divided by 100. In the previous example, this length is an inbuilt function which is provided by Python. But here this get rate is not an inbuilt function. Assume that you have written a function which will return the current rate of interest. So based on the values of these variables and the return value of this function, this expression will evaluate to a value which is called simple interest. So as we have seen in these examples, all these expressions evaluate to some value. And how can we see the value evaluated by these expressions? We can put these expressions inside a print function and it will print the evaluated value of these expressions. Let's try to do that in a Python program. So I have opened my PyCharm. So let's create another Python file here. So you can do right click, new and select Python file. So let's simply call this as basics. All right. So you can simply press enter and it will create the Python file for us, which is basics.py. So let me add some code inside this. Here I have created two variables a and b with values 10 and 20. And I've put all the expressions inside print function so that the evaluated value gets printed to the console. I've not added this particular example because this expression depends on this get rate function. We don't have any get rate function available for now. So I'm not adding this in the program, but I hope you got the idea. Now if we execute this program, right click, run basics, which is the name of our Python file. This is the output we got. So here we are trying to print 10 plus 20, which will be 30. So it prints 30. And here the expression is 2 star a plus b. A is 10, b is 20. So a plus b is 30. 2 star a plus b is 60. So it prints 60. Now whenever we use this plus between two strings, Python will concatenate these strings, which means it will join these strings hello and world. And it will create a new string hello world. So this expression will evaluate to a string hello world. That's why it prints hello world here. Also one thing to mention here is that whenever we say Python performs a certain operation, what we actually mean is Python interpreter performs that operation. We know that Python interpreter is the actual software program that executes these instructions. So it is the Python interpreter that actually performs these operations. But for the sake of simplicity, we very often say Python performs so and so operation. And as you can see, when we concatenate the strings, the space will not be added automatically, right? There is no space in between hello and world. So what we can do is, if we want the space to be present between these two strings, you can add a space at the end of the first string, or if you want, we can add a space at the beginning of the next string. Now if you try to execute this, you can see the space is printed. So space is just like any other character like A or B. So here basically we have first string which is hello, and the second string includes a space and world, right? That's why it prints hello space world. We will be learning about strings in a separate lecture where we will discuss a lot of things. So this is just to give you a basic idea. Now in the last line we have length of hello. So this will evaluate to 5, right? So it will print 5. And if you add a couple of spaces here, now if you try to execute this, we can see that it will evaluate to 7 because space is also considered a character. So in total we have 7 characters in this sequence. So it will print 7 in this case. Now that we understood about expressions, let's see what do we mean by a statement. A statement is an instruction that tells Python to perform some action that has some side effect. For example, if we see this assignment statement, here we are assigning this expression a plus b to this variable sum. So here Python is not only evaluating this expression a plus b, but it also has a side effect, which is it is assigning this value to a variable called sum. Now let's see this import statement. Sometimes we might want to use the functions which are written in some other Python file in our current program. In such cases, we can use this import statement to import the code which is present in other Python file, which is also called as module, into our current program. We will discuss more about import statements when we learn about concepts like modules, packages, and libraries. Now let's see this very familiar print statement. So here basically we are calling this print function and we are asking it to print the value of this expression. If we say this length function, it will simply evaluate to a value which is 5, right? But here when we use this print function, it has a side effect, which is it will print this value to the console. These are some of the examples of statements, and as we go along the course, we will learn about different Python statements. Now one interesting thing about print function is that it is not considered as a pure statement. It is called an expression statement, as it also returns none value. What do we mean by this? When we use this print function, it will not only print this expression value to the console, but it will also return a none value. Just like how length function returns the length of the sequence, here this print function will return a value called none. None is similar to null value, which we generally find in other programming languages. But the point here is, even though this print function returns a none value, we are not using that value anywhere. We are using this print function to perform a certain action of printing the value of this expression to the console. So that's why we call this print function as an expression statement, which means it performs an action like a statement, but it also evaluates to a none value, which is a property of an expression. Now for the sake of demonstration, let's put this print of Python, this particular function, inside another print function. Now what will this outer print function do? It will try to print the evaluated value of this expression. So first this expression has to be evaluated. Now what will this print of Python do? It will print Python to the console, right? This is the expression. So it will print Python to the console, and then it will return none value, right? Now this outer print function, it will print the none value which is written by this print of Python function. So it will print none value. And in fact, not only that, after it prints this none value, this print function will also return a none value. We are not using this none value anywhere, but it will anyway return that value. Now let's see this demonstration in PyCharm. So here what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to print this string Python to the console using print function. And in the next line, what I'll try to do is I'll put this print of Python function inside this print function in this way. Now let's run this program and see what happens. So this is the output we got. So let me expand this. So these four outputs are from the previous statements, right? These statements. So as you can see here, if you see these lines 9 and 10, first this line 9, this prints this Python to the console. All right. Now this particular line, first this print of Python, it will print Python to the console and it will return a none value, which is printed by this particular outer print function. So it will also print this none value. I hope now it is clear to you why we call this print function as an expression statement and not as a pure statement. Now that we understood expressions and statements, let's quickly see some examples. So here in this example, we have a is equal to 10. Now we call this as an expression. Even though we have just a single value 10 here, we can say this evaluates to a value 10. So this can be called as an expression. Now we are assigning this value 10 to this variable a. So this whole thing is called a statement. Now if we see this example, here a plus 10 is an expression which evaluates to some value. So this is called an expression and we are assigning that to this variable b. So this whole thing is called a statement. Now if we see here, a plus b is an expression which will evaluate to a value. And as we have discussed before, print function is called an expression statement because this will print this value to the console and it will also return a none value, which of course we don't use. Now if we see this last example, here we have two strings hello comma and old exclamatory mark, which are concatenated using plus. So this is called an expression which will evaluate to hello world. And this print function will print this expression value to the console. And so this whole thing is called expression statement. Till now we have seen the statements which are written in single lines like assignment, import statements or print functions. But there are some statements which span across multiple lines. We call them as compound statements. A compound statement is nothing but a structure that contains a group of statements spanning multiple lines. Some of the examples of compound statements are if statements, for loops, while loops, and function definitions. We will be discussing about these concepts in separate tutorials, but just to give an example, this is how we will write an if statement. So don't worry about syntax for now. What we are basically asking Python to do here is that if this condition age greater than 18 is true, we are asking it to print you are eligible to vote. And if this condition is false, we are asking it to print you are not eligible to vote. This whole thing is called one if statement. Don't worry, we will discuss about all these things in detail in future tutorials. Now let's see how we can write comments in Python. What do we mean by comments? These are non-executable lines written in a Python program to make it easy to understand the code. For example, let's say we are writing a logic to find the area of a circle. So what we do, we take the radius of the circle. So we create a variable radius to which we assign some value. And what is the area of circle? Pi r square, right? Pi is approximately equal to 3.14. So what we do is we create a variable called area and we assign this expression 3.14 star radius, which is pi r square, to this variable called area. Now here in the final line, we are printing the value of this area. Now when you work on real-time projects in industry, what happens? You will be collaborating with 10 or 20 different other software engineers. So it's important that the other people who read your code understand your code properly. So by putting comments like these, it will be much easier for others to read and understand your code. It might not seem very important for this example, but when you work on real-time projects, you will be dealing with thousands of lines. In such cases, writing comments will be really useful for others to understand your code. And the way we create comments in Python is by putting this hash symbol, and then we can write whatever description we want. And we can even add comments after a line of code. You can simply put a hash and we can write comment here as well. Here let's write the logic to find the area of circle. So let's create a variable radius and let me assign a value 10 to this. And in the next line, I am finding the area of the circle by using 3.14 star radius star radius, right? Because area of circle is pi r square. Now in the next line, we are trying to print the value of this variable. So what we can do is here we can put a comment saying find the area of a circle in this way. And we can also put comment at the end of any line of code. For example, here we can put a comment and say print area in the console, right? Now if we run this program, right click and run. Now as you can see, so it evaluates this value 3.14 star 10 star 10, which will be 314. And one thing we need to understand in Python is that if we have any floating point value in the expression, the final value of the expression will also be a floating point value. That's why we get 314.0. When we generally calculate in normal math problems, we will ignore if we have dot zero, right? We'll simply put 314. But in case of Python, it will be 314.0 because we have one float value here. And what we can do is, even in the previous examples, we can put a comment here. Let's say expressions examples. All right. And even here we can put a comment print expression statement. Now, as you can see, this program now seems much more structured and it is much easier to understand what is happening inside. So always try to use comments when you have too many things happening inside your code. That's all for this tutorial, and I hope you got a good understanding of expressions, statements, and comments. I'll see you in the next video.